I wore my white wedding dress standing beside the man who once swore he'd love me forever. But only I knew 72 hours earlier he slept with my best friend, on the same couch I was still paying off. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, grabbed the mic, and played the video for his mother, our families, and 147 guests. They were stunned. I smiled. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more shocking, heartbreaking movie-style stories like this one. The air inside the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but suffocates. Outside, the late evening light slipped through the blinds in strips, painting golden bars across the hardwood floor. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then nothing. Just me and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The house, though filled with furniture, felt abandoned, like the soul had been sucked out of it. I sat cross-legged in the center of the living room floor, still wearing the cream slip from the wedding reception. The hem was wrinkled, one strap hanging loose. I hadn't bothered to change. My hair was still pinned, but the curls had given up hours ago. I hadn't cried. Not yet. My name is Brielle Monroe, and this is the beginning of the ending. My fingers grazed the hardwood, feeling the coolness beneath me, grounding myself. I looked around at the candles still lit from earlier. The scent of vanilla and something floral still lingered faintly in the air, a scent I used to love. Now it made my stomach twist. Too sweet. Too fake. On the side table beside the fireplace sat a frame, our engagement photo. Damien's arms wrapped around me, our foreheads touching like we couldn't bear to be apart. Savannah took the photo. She said it was her wedding gift to us. I remember thinking how perfectly she'd captured the moment. Now I couldn't look at it. The photo frame tipped slightly crooked on purpose. I'd done that the moment I walked in tonight. A small act of rebellion, a signal to myself that nothing would go back to the way it was, not even the angle of a photo. I took a slow breath, held it, then let it out with the kind of weight that only comes after pretending too long. Everything in this house felt curated, posed. From the floral arrangements Damien insisted on to the wine glasses Savannah had gifted engraved with our initials. It was like living in a catalog of a life I was supposed to want. But standing here now, it felt more like a stage, and I was done performing. 1 week ago, I was trying on wedding dresses with Savannah, laughing over champagne in a boutique where every mirror lied just a little. I wore a lace mermaid gown. She said it made me look like a goddess. The saleswoman clapped. Damien texted me then, "Can't wait to see you in it, babe." I smiled, but that night something shifted. We were at dinner. A simple meal at home. Damien grilled steaks. Savannah dropped by just to say hi. She brought wine, my favorite. She poured Damien's glass first. Her fingers brushed his wrist. So slight, so casual. I watched them, and in that moment I knew. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I'd been with Damien long enough to recognize the difference between warmth and performance. Between the kind of glance that says I love you and the one that says I've already touched you. They had the latter. Still, I smiled. Still, I clinked glasses and laughed at all the right times. I watched Savannah lean into Damien's shoulder when she showed him something on her phone. I caught how he didn't pull away. That night, as I lay beside him in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us. He was already asleep, breathing even, peaceful. My mind wasn't. I thought about how betrayal doesn't start with lips or hands. It starts in moments, in glances held too long, in secrets too small to notice until they rot through the walls. I thought about my mother, how she stayed with my father even after she found receipts for hotel rooms she never visited. I remembered her saying, "Some truths you swallow if you want to keep the house from falling in." But I wasn't her. The next morning, I ordered a hidden camera. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Elise, my oldest friend from college. Not even my therapist, who would have raised 1,000 red flags. I told myself it was for closure. Just to be sure. Just to confirm the thing I already knew. But that was a lie. I wanted to catch them. I wanted to see their betrayal in full color. I wanted the kind of proof that couldn't be denied, even if it shattered me. The package arrived 2 days later. A discreet little device that looked like a decorative plug-in. I placed it in the corner of the living room facing the couch, facing the place where Savannah always sat when she stopped by. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. But that's not this moment, not yet. This moment right here, right now, is after the storm, after the vows, after the fallout. This is the moment when the bride, now unclaimed, sits alone in the echo of a ceremony built on lies. Because I didn't call off the wedding. No, I went through with it. I smiled. I said I do. I kissed him in front of our families. I let Savannah stand beside me in matching lavender silk. I let her adjust my veil. I let it all happen. And then I waited until the lights were low and the champagne flowed, until the room was full and the attention was fixed, until Savannah was drunk on confidence and Damien was too smug to notice the storm in my eyes. That was when I pressed play. But we're not there yet. Right now I'm just sitting here, quiet, calm, alone. My hands are still, my heart steady. There's no rage left, only purpose. Outside the wind picks up. It whistles past the windows, rustling the blinds. I listen to it. I think about what people will say, about how they'll react, about how Savannah will defend herself, about how Damien will lie, deny, spin. Let them. I've never been loud, never been the dramatic one, always the peacemaker, the understanding one, the let's not make a scene girl. But there's a kind of power in silence they never saw coming, a kind of vengeance that doesn't scream, it just watches, waits, and then strikes with precision. I glance at the clock. It's been 2 hours since I walked out of that ballroom, since the screen went dark and the gasps rose. I haven't looked at my phone, I don't need to. The silence tells me everything. This house, this ring, this perfect picture life, they were all built on borrowed time, and now the time has run out. Tomorrow I'll leave. The bags are already packed. Oregon, maybe. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can breathe again. But tonight I stay. Tonight I sit in the stillness and reclaim my voice. Because I wasn't the one who broke this. I was just the one who finally stopped pretending it wasn't broken. And that changes everything. The rain had started sometime between the boutique and the parking garage. A lazy drizzle at first, then heavier, sharp, and vertical. I hadn't brought an umbrella, didn't even think to check the forecast. I clutched the garment bag tighter against my body as I jogged across the pavement, heels clicking, cold, wet hair clinging to my cheekbones. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered in that moment except getting home out of the storm. The wedding dress inside that bag was delicate ivory lace, floor-length, hand-beaded bodice. Savannah said it made me look regal. I didn't feel regal. I felt like a mannequin wrapped in lies. I pulled into the driveway just after 6. Damien's car was already there. That surprised me. He was supposed to have dinner with his business partner. At least that's what he told me when he kissed my forehead this morning and said, "Don't wait up." I didn't overthink it, not at first. The porch light was on. Odd he never turned it on that early. Still, I slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The house was lit. All of it. Kitchen, hallway, even the dimmers in the living room glowed a soft amber. I stood there a moment, dress bag damp and heavy in my arms, trying to make sense of the energy in the space. There was music playing, faint, almost imperceptible, but not coming from a speaker. It was Savannah's laugh. Low, breathless. I didn't move, just listened. I'd heard her laugh my whole life. At sleepovers, on birthday trips, in college dorm rooms when we whispered about boys under fairy lights. But this laugh, it didn't belong to the girl who once painted my toenails during finals week. It belonged to someone who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care. A few seconds passed. Then I stepped inside and shut the door quietly behind me. My heels made no sound against the rug as I walked toward the kitchen. I didn't call out, didn't announce myself. I set the dress bag down on the console table. The house smelled like rosemary and something else. Citrus, maybe. Savannah's signature perfume. She gave it to me for Christmas 2 years ago. Said it reminded her of clean beginnings. I felt the irony scrape across my spine. I walked toward the far end of the living room and turned on the hallway light not to startle them, but to give them a chance, one last out, a warning. Oh, nothing. I slipped my hand into the drawer of the entry table and pulled out the tiny black remote. Thumbed the power button. The flat screen above the fireplace flickered to life. A split-screen view appeared 4 camera angles. Living room, kitchen, stairwell, guest room. I stared at the top left box. There they were. Damien, Savannah, on my couch. His hand rested casually on her thigh. Hers on his shoulder. They weren't kissing. Not yet. Just leaning into each other. Her bare foot tucked under her. His tie undone. They looked comfortable. Familiar. Like this wasn't the first time. The footage was clear. Audio muted, but body language unmistakable. Savannah whispered something. Damien laughed, and then he leaned in. I turned off the screen, not because I couldn't watch, but because I didn't need more. I had enough. My breath stayed steady. No hiccups, no sharp inhales. My palms didn't sweat. There was a strange sort of silence inside me now. Not the hollow kind. The still kind. The clarity before impact kind. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer next to the fridge, and pulled out a flash drive. I inserted it into the media console and copied the file. 1 folder, 2 minutes and 27 seconds, labeled it Truth. The progress bar filled slowly. 60%. 75. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and watched it climb. Savannah's laugh echoed again down the hallway. My name was never mentioned. They were bold now, unworried. I didn't go in. When the transfer completed, I ejected the drive and slipped it into the zipper pocket of my coat. Then I opened the notebook sitting by the kitchen sink. My recipe journal, the one with wine stains and grocery lists scribbled in the margins. I flipped to the last page. Blank. I uncapped the pen, and I wrote 1 line. I wasn't betrayed, I was shown the truth. The ink bled slightly against the paper, curling in places where the page had absorbed moisture from the air. I stared at the sentence for a long moment. There was no flourish, no exclamation. Just black on white. Truth, naked and still. The door down the hall clicked. I didn't turn. I folded the notebook closed, slipped it under the stack of cookbooks, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the window showed a woman who looked calm, almost detached, but my spine was iron. When Damien stepped into the kitchen and saw me, he blinked once, twice, then forced a smile like the air hadn't just changed around us. "Hey, babe, you're home early." I turned slowly, glass in hand, raised an eyebrow, said nothing. He glanced over his shoulder. Savannah just stopped by. She, forgot her jacket from last night's dinner. I let the silence stretch. He filled it with babble. Something about work being stressful. Something about his phone dying. None of it mattered. I took a slow sip from my glass, walked past him toward the stairs, and paused just long enough to say, "You should turn off the lights when you lie." His face fell just for a second, a crack in the mask. Then I walked upstairs. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to beg, because when you hold truth in your hands, you don't have to raise your voice. You just wait for the silence to work its way in. It was the kind of office you wouldn't look at twice if you passed by on the street, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a dry cleaner with flickering signage. The brass letters on the glass read, "Martin and Dell Attorneys at Law." It smelled like old paper lemon oil and quiet warnings. I sat in the waiting room with a folder on my lap. Inside a printed screenshot from the surveillance footage, copies of Damien's text messages that felt too affectionate to be innocent, and a list I'd started on my phone titled What I Know, What I Can Prove. A receptionist offered me water. I declined. 5 minutes later, a door opened and an older man stepped into the lobby. Gray suit, conservative tie eyes, like someone who had seen too much and learned not to react to any of it. Ms. Monroe. I stood. Yes. He nodded once. I'm Alan Dell. Come on in. The office wasn't impressive. No plaques or awards. Just bookshelves stacked with folders and a single framed photograph of his daughter graduating from law school. I noticed it because it was the only warm thing in the room. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. So, tell me what you need. I took a breath, the kind that drags itself out of your bones, then opened the folder and pushed it toward him. I'm supposed to get married next week, but I have reason to believe my fiancé and my best friend are having an affair. He didn't flinch. You want a divorce attorney? I shook my head. No. I want something stronger than that. I want to know if the marriage can be voided before it even becomes legal. That got his attention. He leaned back, arms crossed. You mean annulment? No, I said, voice even. I mean nullification. Legal grounds for voiding a marriage based on fraud. He tilted his head. You've done your research. I've done more than that. I reached into my coat and pulled out the USB drive. I have evidence, footage, possibly audio, and I'm still collecting. He didn't touch the drive, just stared at me for a moment, then said, Do you want to stop the wedding? No, I said. I want it to happen. That made him pause. You're planning to marry someone you have evidence is cheating on you. I nodded. Because when I strike, I want it to be public and irreversible. He looked at me differently after that. Not like I was fragile, like I was dangerous. He flipped open the folder, read a few lines, and murmured, You'll need more than this. I know, I replied. That's why I'm here. I want to understand what the law requires for a marriage to be considered invalid due to deceit. I need the exact language. I want to make sure every step I take is admissible. He opened a drawer, pulled out a statute binder, and began walking me through the relevant clauses. Fraudulent inducement, misrepresentation of intent, concealment of material fact. Words that sounded like daggers wrapped in paperwork. I memorized them. An hour later, I walked out of his office with 2 things: a clear legal strategy and a printed checklist of the evidence I still needed to gather. The rain had stopped, but the world was soaked. I stood on the curb watching cars pass and realized something strange. I felt steady. No spinning, no heartbreak, just focus. Back at home, I started organizing everything. I created a digital folder titled Safe. Subfolders, photos, video-audio transcripts. I used an encrypted cloud service and backed everything up to a hard drive I hid in the back of my closet behind a box labeled Winter Scarves. I started checking Damien's phone at night when he left it charging on the kitchen counter. No passcode. He was always cocky like that. There were texts from Savannah. Nothing overt. Just too many inside jokes. Too many. You make me laugh more than I should. Messages sent at 11:34 p.m. I screenshotted them all. Then I placed a second camera, this one disguised as a diffuser, on the hallway console, just in case they got bold. Every morning I exported files. Every night I recorded notes, time dates, behavior patterns. I wasn't unraveling. I was tracking. In between the surveillance, I rehearsed. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced every expression I'd need to wear at the altar. The soft smile, the tearful laugh, the wide-eyed surprise. I recited my vows like they were lines from a play I never auditioned for, but planned to steal the show in anyway. I trained myself not to flinch when I said I do. I trained myself not to spit when Savannah adjusted my veil. I trained my face to say love even when my heart screamed liar. At night, I watched old footage of Damien, early videos from when we first started dating. I studied the way he looked at me back then. The way his fingers curled around my waist like I was made of something precious. I compared it to how he looked at Savannah now. That contrast burned a scar into my ribs I could name by time and date. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I trained. There's a certain clarity that comes when you let the pain settle instead of fighting it. When you stop begging to be chosen and start preparing for war. People always say heartbreak turns women into monsters. They're wrong. It turns us into architects. We start drawing blueprints for survival. We study structural weakness. We memorize exit plans. And when the time comes, we don't knock. We detonate. One night, while Damien was in the shower, I sat at the vanity and stared into my reflection. I adjusted my posture, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, smiled without showing teeth. Then I whispered the line I'd say to myself before it all began. I don't need anyone to defend me. I just need to be steady enough to hold the knife with both hands. And I was. God, I was. The air inside the chapel was soft and heavy like a sigh that hadn't yet been exhaled. Everything smelled like roses, hundreds of them. Cream blush and white arranged in tall gold vases spiraling up the aisle like a path to a promised life. I stood behind the closed doors, veil draped lightly over my face, listening to the swell of the strings as they began the slow intro of Canon in D. The wedding coordinator gave me a quick thumbs up, mouthing, "Ready?" I nodded once. She opened the doors. The room turned toward me, and I smiled. It was the kind of smile people photograph small, demure, glowing just enough to imply grace. I took one step forward, then another. Each heel click echoed carefully, timed with the music. Everyone stood. Guests smiled with misty eyes. My mother dabbed her nose with a lace-trimmed handkerchief. My father, straight-backed, tried not to cry. Damien stood at the altar, his tuxedo crisp, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked like a man about to receive everything he ever wanted. Savannah stood to the right, bouquet in hand, lips painted in the exact shade of rose I wore when we were 21 and drunk on cheap wine. She wore lavender chiffon and a smile that teetered between excitement and satisfaction. To anyone watching, it was the perfect day. Polished, timed, elegant. But no one, not a single person in that room, saw what was happening behind my eyes. The calculations. The inventory of lies. The plan now in motion. I reached the altar and took Damien's hand. He squeezed it firm and steady as if to say, "We made it." I didn't squeeze back. The pastor welcomed everyone, then launched into the standard platitudes about love, commitment, and unity. I kept my eyes forward, chin tilted just slightly to catch the light veil still lowered. I could see Damien only through a soft haze, which felt accurate. "You may now share your vows," the pastor said. Damien smiled. He pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket. He looked at me like I was everything he had ever dreamed of. And then with that same practiced sincerity he used to lie about late meetings, he began. "Brielle, from the moment I met you, I knew I was home. You are my calm, my compass, and my fire." I tuned him out around my compass. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't mean anything. He said the words well, smooth, measured, just the right tremble in the voice when he mentioned forever. He didn't choke, didn't fumble. He performed perfectly. Savannah's eyes were glassy as she watched him. She dabbed at the corner of her eye as if moved. The crowd murmured in approval. Someone sighed. My aunt clutched her husband's hand. The pastor turned to me. "And now, Brielle." I reached into the folds of my dress and pulled out my own vow. 3 folded lines of ivory cardstock, neat and uncreased. I unfolded it slowly, steadily, held it just above the trembling edge of my bouquet. I looked at Damien, and I said, "Damien, I believe there are 2 kinds of love in this world, the kind that lifts you and the kind that teaches you to lift yourself. Thank you for showing me both." A pause, a beat of stillness. I smiled. The audience clapped before the meaning could settle. Damien looked a little puzzled, just a flicker in his brow, but the moment moved on. The pastor continued prompting the exchange of rings. Damien slid the band onto my finger with care. His hands were warm, mine were cold. I repeated the words. With this ring, I thee wed, with the kind of poise that comes from rehearsing in a mirror at midnight, while your heart hardens under the weight of knowing too much. We kissed. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. People cheered. My mother's tears turned to joy. The organ flared with a triumphant chord. We walked down the aisle hand in hand, Mr. and Mrs. Damien Holt showered with white rose petals and applause. To them it was a celebration. To me it was the cleanest execution I'd ever orchestrated. Outside the chapel, the sky was powder blue. No clouds, no wind. The photographers guided us to the manicured garden for portraits. We posed beneath an arch of wisteria. He held my waist. I tilted my chin just right. Savannah stood between us in one-shot arms, linked her laugh loud and free. We looked beautiful, but every movement felt like holding a knife by the blade and smiling while it bled into silk. As the sun dipped lower, we made our way to the reception hall. Candlelight flickered from every table. Champagne flutes glistened. The cake stood tall in 5 tiers of buttercream and illusion. The seating chart placed Savannah directly across from us at the head table. I had insisted. She laughed loudly when our best man toasted to a friendship so strong it could weather any storm. Damien raised his glass. I sipped mine, and all the while I felt the small USB drive tucked securely into the lining of my clutch. Just beneath the surface of this perfect tableau was the thing none of them saw coming. An hour later, when the first dance ended and the band took a break, I stood from my seat, tapped my glass once, twice. The room quieted, and as I stepped toward the projector screen, Damien insisted we include for the photo montage. I whispered to myself, the only vow that mattered, let them have this moment. Let them bask. Because when it falls, I won't need to raise my voice. I'll just press play. The first warning was the lights. They didn't go out all at once, just a dimming. A slight flicker that made people glance around, murmur, then chuckle nervously. The string quartet had just finished their second set. Waiters in black ties were refilling wine glasses. Forks clinked against plates of lemon risotto and seared scallops. Everything was still wrapped in that gossamer sheen of post-ceremony bliss. I sat at the head table, hands folded calmly in my lap. Savannah, still glowing, sat across from me. Her lipstick had faded just slightly, and strands of hair had loosened around her face. Damien leaned over, whispered something in her ear that made her laugh into her champagne. She didn't even glance at me. Neither of them did. Perfect. The projector screen behind us flickered to life. A low hum filled the room. People turned. A few clapped, assuming it was the photo montage baby pictures, childhood memories that time I wore braces and still somehow thought I could model. I had fed that narrative carefully. Sweet bride, devoted daughter, hopeless romantic. They were so ready to celebrate the fairy tale. The first image appeared. It was Damien on one knee in the gardens at Rosewood Hill. The same proposal everyone had seen on social media. The same ring. The same sunlight catching in my tears. The room cooed in unison. My aunt squeezed my mother's arm. Someone whispered, "I love this part." Then the video shifted. Same garden, same Damien. But this time he was seated on my living room couch, tie-loosened lips against Savannah's neck. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 7:42 p.m., exactly 3 days before our wedding. The audio wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The silence in the room amplified everything. Savannah's laugh. Damien's voice. "We should have done this sooner," her reply. "She won't suspect. She never does." Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped. A wine glass fell shattered. Savannah froze her hand mid-reach for a roll, eyes locked on the screen. Color drained from her face like a faucet had been turned inside her skin. Damien sat up slowly, his smile gone. confusion narrowing his eyes into slits. The video kept playing, Savannah straddling him, Damien's hand pushing her dress up, their voices too clear to be misinterpreted. Muffled horror began to ripple through the tables. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered, "Is this a prank?" My mother-in-law let out a small, shocked sound before tipping sideways in her chair. Someone caught her just before she hit the ground. Savannah stood violently. "Turn it off!" she barked, voice shrill and high-pitched. This isn't what it looks like." But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. Damien turned to me. He looked pale, hollow. The smirk he wore earlier was gone, replaced with a taut, flickering fear. I stood, calmly, picked up the mic from the DJ's stand beside the dance floor. The lights remained dim. The screen froze on the final frame. Savannah's face pressed against Damien's neck. Eyes closed, mouth open in a sigh of surrender. I took one breath, let the room still, and then I spoke. "My name is Brielle Monroe," I said. Voice, steady eyes scanning the room. And tonight was supposed to be the beginning of forever. That's what they told me. Nobody moved. You could hear someone's fork still gently rattling against a plate 2 tables over. But forever can't start with lies. It can't be built on betrayal. It can't begin with a man who cheats, and a woman who smiles at you while doing it. A long pause. Then I added, "People told me to forgive, to be gracious, to protect the peace." I looked straight at Savannah. They said, "Don't cause a scene, Brielle. It's your wedding. Be the bigger person." Savannah's mouth opened, but no sound came. I turned to Damien. He looked like a man who'd just discovered a trap door under his feet and realized it had been open the whole time. But I've learned, I continued, that silence is not strength when it's used to protect people who are actively hurting you. I raised my chin, the lights casting a soft halo around my veil still draped like armor. "So I won't be silent anymore." Then I said the line I'd rehearsed alone 100 times. The line that wasn't for drama or vengeance or applause, but for me. Everyone told me to forgive, but I choose freedom. A ripple moved through the guests. Some stood instinctively. Some sat eyes wide, unmoving. My mother's hand was over her mouth. My father, stoic private, looked like he was trying to piece the version of his daughter he thought he knew back together. Savannah whispered, "You psycho," almost under her breath. Her hands trembled as she tried to unplug the projector cord. I didn't look at her again. Damien reached out toward me. "Brielle, wait, we can talk." I stepped back, 1 step, clean and final. "I did talk," I said quietly. "You just never listened." Then I placed the mic down gently and walked away. No slamming, no screaming, no threats hurled across linen-covered tables. Just heels against polished wood, 1 step after another, each one a sentence in a story that had already ended. As I reached the door, I turned back once not to see their faces, but to look at the crowd. The witnesses. And I said thank you all for coming, not a farewell, a benediction, because this wasn't just the collapse of a wedding, it was the beginning of my liberation. Damien moved fast. The moment I set the mic down, he lunged for the projector stand, like a man trying to smother a fire with his bare hands. His expression wasn't rage, not yet. It was fear, a guttural, stunned kind of panic that twists men into versions of themselves they can't explain later. But he didn't get far. The venue's security, 2 men in tuxedo-cut jackets and quiet eyes, intercepted him halfway across the room. One placed a firm hand on Damien's shoulder. The other stepped in front of the projector. Calm, controlled. Sir One said, voice low but final, "You need to stop." Damien shook his head, eyes wild. "Do you know what she's done? This is slander. This is..." He pointed toward the screen, still frozen on Savannah's flushed face. "She's ruining everything." The guard didn't flinch. "Sir, please step back." Guests were whispering now. Phones were out, recording, texting, flashing. Savannah had collapsed into her chair, 1 hand pressed to her chest, mascara beginning to streak. She wasn't crying, at least not the kind of tears that come from pain. These were from exposure. She kept darting glances at the exits at me at the screen. She looked like a woman whose mask had been ripped off mid-performance and suddenly realized the crowd was still seated. I took one breath and then reached for my ring. The diamond glinted under the warm light above the head table. For a second it caught the eye of the photographer who, God bless her, raised her camera instinctively. Click! I slid the ring from my finger. It made the softest sound like silk whispering across skin. I held it up for a moment, not to present it, not to make a statement, but just to see it clearly one last time, and then I placed it gently on the center of the dessert plate, right next to a lavender macaron. I turned veil still in place and began walking toward the exit. People parted for me without being asked, like they understood somehow that this wasn't a scene to interrupt. This was ritual, closing, surrender by choice. The music had stopped long ago. The only sound now was the low hum of human discomfort, murmurs, camera shutters, and the buzz of phones lighting up with incoming alerts. One guest whispered, "Is she seriously leaving?" Another said she planned this. I kept walking. As I passed the gift table, I caught sight of a silver-wrapped box from Damien's cousin, a man who had once cornered me at Thanksgiving and asked if I thought marriage was still necessary in modern society. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was perfect. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. Or maybe it was just that the veil had finally lifted. The valet rushed forward, stammering something about how they could pull the car around. I handed him a tip, smiled, and said, "Don't worry, I'm walking." The moment my heels touched the pavement, I felt it, that sliver of separation, that breath between the version of me that said yes and the one who just walked away from it all. Back at the house, I didn't speak. I didn't blast music or scream into pillows or pour myself a glass of wine like in the movies. I simply packed, efficiently, calmly. One suitcase, one duffel. I left the dress hanging in the closet. I didn't want it. Not because it hurt to look at, but because it didn't belong to me anymore. That dress was stitched from illusion, and I'd already outgrown it. I unplugged my hard drive, slipped it into the lining of the suitcase, grabbed my passport, my backup debit card, and the keys to my old Jeep that no one had driven in 6 months. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing to explain, and I didn't want to give Damien the dignity of a goodbye. At 2:13 a.m., I turned off the porch light and stepped into the driver's seat. I started the car, let it idle. My phone buzzed once, twice, 20 times. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. The city that had cradled every version of me. The girl who fell for Damien. The woman who tried to love him right. The bride who smiled through betrayal was still glittering behind me. Beautiful, distant. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I drove past the bakery where we'd ordered the cake. Past the corner where Savannah had once helped me parallel park after too many mimosas. Past the apartment building where Damien had first kissed me and told me he didn't believe in fate, but maybe I could change his mind. I let all of it pass like landscape through a window. Familiar, irrelevant. At the first red light, I whispered it out loud just once. Not to anyone. Just to the silence that had become my truest witness. I'm not running. The words settled in my chest, warm and heavy and honest. I'm just out of places to stay. And with that, I turned onto the highway. The exit signs blurred, the moon hung low, and the road opened up ahead of me like a sentence finally finishing itself. It wasn't marked on any of the maps. The town sat at the edge of Oregon like a whispered secret, just past the stretch of evergreens that seemed to never end, wrapped around a lake so still it looked like glass pressed against the sky. You wouldn't find it unless you were running from something or searching for nothing. I happened to be both. I arrived in the early morning. Fog clung low to the road, reluctant to lift. The sign read, "Welcome to Waverly Lake. Pop 2087. Just beneath it, someone had scribbled in marker, "Don't blink or you'll miss it." That felt right. The town center was 3 blocks wide. A bakery with chipped paint. A bookstore with a bell that jingled like a wind chime. A grocery store with hand-lettered signs. And there on the corner, half covered in ivy windows smudged with time, was the café. It had no name. The for rent sign in the window was sun-faded and taped from the inside. I stood there for a long moment, hands in the pockets of my coat, trying to imagine the place filled with life again, with laughter, with the sound of cups clinking against ceramic saucers. But more than that, I imagined it filled with silence, not the sharp, punishing kind, but the healing sort, the silence that lets you breathe again. Inside it smelled like dust and memories. The air was thick with stories that had dried up in corners. The counter was still there, though the register was missing. A shelf near the door held a few mismatched mugs leftovers from another lifetime. Sunlight bled through the dirty windows, tracing long lines across the wooden floors. The landlord's name was Clark, retired mechanic. Said he used to come in here every morning before the last owner closed up shop and left for Arizona with a man half her age. He handed me the key with no questions asked. I signed the lease for 6 months. No long-term commitments. Just enough time to remember who I was before I learned to smile through betrayal. I spent the first 2 days cleaning. I started with the windows. Every streak I wiped away felt like erasing someone else's fingerprints from the frame of my life. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and I let them groan and moan and stretch like the place was waking up alongside me. The old sign out front was rotted, the paint flaking off in thin curls. I took it down myself, one rusted screw at a time. Then I painted a new one. White background. Hand-lettered black script. Simple. Honest. Second vow. A name I didn't have to explain, because it wasn't about marriage or romance. It was about the promise you make to yourself when the first one breaks. The vow to stand again, to keep breathing, to keep showing up even when you're not sure how. I hung the sign just before sundown. The lake beyond the town square shimmered like melted silver, and for the first time in weeks my shoulders weren't pulled up to my ears. The next morning I started on the back room, an old storage closet with shelves that held boxes labeled Hope Summer Menu and one that simply read Carol's Stuff, Do Not Touch. I touched it. Inside, a pair of ballet flats, a dried bouquet, a lipstick-stained coffee mug with Not Today, Satan printed in gold foil. I didn't throw them out. I lined them up on the shelf like an altar to whoever Carol was. She left quietly, but she had fought something here. I could feel it. Late in the afternoon, just as I was scrubbing a stubborn stain from the tile behind the bar, the bell above the door jingled. I wasn't expecting anyone. She walked in like she owned the place, not out of arrogance but habit. Late 70s gray curls tucked under a woven sun hat, lips the color of dried cherries. She wore a cardigan layered over another cardigan. Her cane tapped against the tile with every second step. She stopped in the middle of the cafe, squinting through her glasses. "This used to be Carol's," she said, voice raspy but clear. I straightened. That's what I heard. She tilted her head. "You're not from here. Not even close. You buy it, leasing it, for now." She looked around. Not approving, not judging. Just seeing. Then her eyes settled on the sign leaning behind the counter, the one I hadn't mounted yet. Second vow, she read aloud. "That's something." I nodded. She stepped closer, lowering herself onto the stool with the least wobble. "People think the second vow is about redemption," she said. "It's not. It's about reckoning. Saying, I see what happened the first time and I choose anyway. That takes guts." I leaned against the counter. "Have you made one?" She smiled. "Honey, I've made 5. We sat in comfortable silence. She didn't ask for coffee, I had none yet, but I poured her a glass of water, and she drank it like it was enough. "I'm Ruth," she said after a while. "Live 2 doors down. Used to own the flower shop." "I'm Brielle, I know." That surprised me. "This town's small," she said as if reading my thoughts. "You learn quick who's passing through and who's planting roots." "I haven't decided yet." "Don't have to," she replied. "Some of us don't grow roots. Some of us float. The bell jingled again as she stood. She moved slower now, her weight heavier on the cane. Just before leaving, she paused by the door. "You got a story," she said, not asking. "Don't tell it too soon. Let the walls hear it first. Let the dust settle." I nodded. She nodded back. Then she was gone, and I was alone again. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like something had just begun. It was a Tuesday when the letter found me. I say, found me because I wasn't looking for it. Not really. I had opened the closet in the back room of the café to pull down an old shoebox I'd tucked away weeks ago, searching for extra nails to finish the chalkboard menu. Instead, I noticed the small cedar box tucked far behind the shelves, wrapped in plastic, yellowed from time edges, softened by years and heat. It was my mother's. I recognized it instantly. The tiny brass clasp, the hand-painted flowers, the initials JM scratched on the bottom in faint, deliberate strokes. I hadn't seen it in years, not since she passed. Not since I cleaned out the attic of our family home with my aunt standing beside me, gently suggesting what to keep and what to forget. Back then I didn't open it. Back then I wasn't ready to hear what she might have said to the version of me still trying to be everyone's everything. But today, I was different. I carried the box to the front of the cafe, wiped off the dust with the sleeve of my sweater, and sat in the patch of sun spilling through the front window. I didn't hesitate. I clicked the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside were things she had folded carefully, old birthday cards, faded photos, a dried sprig of lavender wrapped in dental floss, and at the very bottom, tucked between two envelopes, was a sheet of blue stationery creased in thirds. My name was written across it in my mother's handwriting. Slanted, elegant, the M always curling at the end like a ribbon. Brielle. I unfolded it, hands steady. The paper had absorbed her perfume. I could smell gardenia, her favorite. It read, "Don't choose the one who says all the right things but whose eyes forget how to look at you. Don't trust words that arrive too perfectly. They've been practiced. Love the person whose eyes stay even when they're silent." I froze. The words weren't long, but they landed like something buried deep, finally surfacing. Like an echo I'd been hearing all my life but never quite understood. I closed my eyes, and the memories poured in. My mother used to smile with her mouth, but not her eyes. It's something I never noticed when I was a child. I just thought that's how women smiled when they were tired, when they'd worked long hours and still came home to fold laundry and pretend to enjoy PTA meetings. But I remember one night, must have been around 11 or 12. I found her sitting alone in the kitchen, a glass of wine untouched in front of her, and a yellowed photo in her hand. It was of her and my Aunt Lillian. They were teenagers in the picture. My mom wore a sundress. Lillian had her arm wrapped around her shoulder, both of them beaming sun in their hair wind on their skin. That kind of joy that only lives in the bones of young girls before the world sharpens its claws. I asked her what she was looking at. She slid the photo back into a drawer and said, "Just a story I never finished." Later that week, I overheard a conversation between her and my father. "Don't bring her up again," she'd said. "Some people don't deserve your memories." I didn't know what she meant then. Now I do. Lillian had fallen in love with the same man my mother had dated all through college. They were engaged, rings exchanged, announcements made. Then one day the man disappeared, and a month later Lillian announced she was pregnant. My mother never spoke of it. Not in words. But her eyes told the story every time she looked in the mirror and pulled her mouth into that soft, empty smile. She didn't confront. She didn't scream. She folded her pain into corners and learned how to walk around it. And for years I thought that was strength, that choosing peace over truth made you noble, that silence was the cost of being the better person. But now I understand. She wasn't choosing peace. She was surviving it. She was walking with a wound no one else could see because she'd been told women must bleed quietly if they want to be loved. And maybe that's why she gave me this letter. Because she saw something in me, something of herself, and hoped I'd break the pattern. I ran my thumb across the last line she'd written. You were born to speak even when your voice shakes. I whispered it out loud, not because I needed to hear it, but because I needed the walls of this new place, this café I was rebuilding, this life I was stepping into to hear it first. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. The sun shifted across the floorboards. The sign outside creaked gently in the wind. Somewhere down the street a kid laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from the belly, the kind that hadn't yet learned what it meant to hold things in. And I smiled, not my mother's smile. Mine, real, sharp-edged, alive. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer behind the register, not to hide it, but to anchor it. A reminder that I didn't have to become her to honor her, that I could carry her strength without repeating her silence, because I am the daughter of a woman who once chose to stay quiet in a storm, but I am not her echo. I am her aftershock. It was a Thursday morning when she walked in. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly, same as it always did. I didn't even look up at first. I was behind the counter arranging fresh croissants in the display case, the scent of butter and cinnamon filling the air like a gentle memory. It had rained the night before, and Waverly Lake was still wrapped in fog just the way I liked it. The town moved slow in the mornings. So did I. But when the door closed and the sound of cautious footsteps crossed the worn hardwood floor, something in my spine straightened. I looked up. Savannah. She didn't speak right away. Just stood there in the middle of the room like she wasn't sure if she'd walked into the right place or the wrong version of her past. Her hair was duller now. Not the honey blonde she used to touch up religiously every 2 weeks, but a faded amber tangled slightly at the ends. She wore a trench coat too big for her frame sleeves, swallowing her wrists. Her eyes, once quick, charming, endlessly calculating, looked smaller somehow. Exhausted. Hollow. She looked like a woman who'd been walking through a storm and had finally run out of places to hide. "Hi," she said. I didn't say anything. Just kept my hands moving, sliding the last croissant into place. She stepped forward slowly like she thought the floor might crack beneath her weight. "Guess you weren't expecting me." Still, I said nothing. She laughed once, short and dry. "Honestly, I didn't expect me either." I straightened, closed the case. Then I looked her in the eye. "What do you want, Savannah?" The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't cruel. But it landed with the weight of every quiet truth I'd swallowed over the last year. She blinked, surprised at the flatness of my voice, the control in it. She probably expected tears, shouting, a scene, but this wasn't a wedding hall. And I wasn't the girl she used to know. I didn't come to fight," she said, her voice unsteady. I don't even know why I came, honestly." I raised an eyebrow. "Then try." She sat, not at a table, just on the nearest windowsill, like her body couldn't quite commit to being a customer, a friend, or a memory. She looked around the cafe, taking it in. The pale blue walls, the shelves of used books, the vase of fresh lilies on every table. "You always said you wanted to open a place like this," she murmured. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. She looked at me again. And this time her expression shifted. Softer. Sadder. "I lost everything," she whispered. The words didn't echo. They just hung there, barely touching the air. "Damien left 3 weeks after you did," she continued. "Turns out cheating together doesn't make you compatible." He emptied the joint account, skipped town. I lost my apartment, my job. No one in our circle even speaks to me anymore. They act like I gave them a disease. Her voice cracked. She looked up, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of satisfaction, a vindictive smile. I gave her none. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that." Still, I said nothing, so she finally snapped, her tiredness curdling into bitterness. "Are you happy now you won? I lost. You got your revenge." I walked around the counter, stopped 3 feet from her. My voice, when it came, was quiet, steady. "I never needed you to lose Savannah." She opened her mouth, confused. "I didn't burn that wedding down to ruin your life. I burned it to save mine." She flinched like the words had slapped her. I stepped closer. "You think this?" I gestured to the cafe. The sunlight, the clean air, the peace was about revenge. No. This is what freedom looks like. This is what it feels like to wake up and not carry someone else's betrayal in my mouth like a bitter pill. She swallowed, hard. My voice didn't rise, but the sharpness was unmistakable. I didn't leave because of what you took. I continued. I left because of what I almost gave away. Savannah looked away. Her chin trembled. But I wasn't done. You used to say we were soulmates, I said. That we understood each other better than anyone else. And maybe you were right. Maybe we did. Maybe that's why your betrayal cut deeper than Damien's ever could. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. I took one step back. You came here looking for a reaction. You won't get it. She looked up. Why not? Because I've already buried that version of me, I said. And I don't dig up graves for ghosts. Silence. Then Savannah nodded slowly. I guess I deserved that. I didn't agree. I didn't argue. I just waited. She stood, looked around one last time. This place, it suits you. I didn't respond. She hesitated at the door. Her hand rested on the knob for a moment too long. Then she said without turning around, You always knew how to leave better than me. And then she was gone. The bell jingled softly behind her. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot she'd just occupied. Let the silence stretch. Let the past breathe and release itself. Then I walked back behind the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and got back to work. Under the pale light of courtroom fluorescence, everything looked colder than it should. Even the mahogany desk where I sat felt hollow, like it had been wiped of stories and scrubbed of humanity. There was no glamour here, no poetic justice. Just hard seats, tight knots in the stomach, and a judge who didn't blink when the words defamation and malicious intent were flung into the air like accusations from a firing squad. Damien sat across the aisle, flanked by his attorney, slick hair, expensive suit. The kind of man who could speak confidently about shame while sipping champagne in the same breath. Damien wore a navy blue blazer he used to wear on dates with me. Now it hung looser. Or maybe he was smaller. Pride has a way of shrinking a man when it's all he has left. He didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. He had filed a civil suit 3 months after the wedding that never was. The claim, intentional infliction of emotional distress and public defamation. He alleged that my unwarranted and highly public humiliation caused irreparable damage to his reputation, mental health, and future prospects. His lawyer argued that I had orchestrated the reception reveal with the deliberate goal of character assassination. That I had planned an ambush, baited him into a wedding ceremony, then struck in front of 100 witnesses, some of whom, mind you, posted clips on social media, resulting in thousands of views and a flurry of online shame. They wanted compensation and a public retraction, and for me to pay all court costs. I didn't flinch, because I had something stronger than pride or theatrics. I had the truth. When the judge asked if I had prepared a defense, I stood and nodded once. My lawyer, a quiet, brilliant woman named Layla Chambers, handed me the USB drive. Then she leaned back in her chair, arms folded, watching like someone who had already read the end of the book and knew the monster didn't win. I walked calmly to the media station, plugged in the drive, and asked permission to present visual evidence. The judge, stern, gray-haired no-nonsense, allowed it. The first video played, same as before, Damien on one knee. The proposal, the applause, then the living room footage, Savannah's laugh, his voice, time-stamped, undeniable. The courtroom was silent. Damien shifted in his seat. His lawyer objected. Your Honor, this was illegally obtained surveillance. The judge raised a hand. Did the defendant reside at the location? Yes, I said. And were the cameras legally installed in her place of residence? Yes. Overruled. I pressed play again. Next audio clips. Phone calls between Damien and Savannah, loving explicit, some even dated during our wedding planning sessions. Then emails. Sent from Damien's account to Savannah's, outlining hotel reservations and plans to keep things quiet until after the ceremony. Then the final piece, a voice memo I recorded the night before the wedding. Damien pacing in the hallway outside our bedroom, unaware his Bluetooth earpiece had auto-connected to my phone. Savannah's voice. "Do you feel bad, Damien?" "Not really. She's smart. She'll bounce back. Probably open a bookstore or something sad like that." I paused the audio there. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked at me. I met his eyes. Calm, unapologetic. "The plaintiff claims emotional distress," I said. "But he never intended to marry me in good faith. He orchestrated a deception, misused my finances, disrespected our agreement, and engaged in infidelity with someone I considered family. I didn't expose him for vengeance. I did it to escape." A long pause. Then I said, "The truth may hurt, but it's not defamation if it's real." The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. He asked both parties to stand. Then in a voice that cut through the room like a blade he spoke. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, I find the plaintiff's claims unsubstantiated. The defendant acted within her legal rights. The court recognizes that the marriage entered under false pretenses is subject to annulment." He looked at Damien. "Furthermore, due to the lack of good faith in the presentation of compelling evidence, the plaintiff is not entitled to marital assets or compensation. The request for damages is denied." It was quiet. No one clapped. This wasn't a movie. But in that silence I felt something shift. Damien's lawyer gathered his files quickly, mumbled something about appeals. Damien didn't move, just stared at the floor like it might swallow him if he waited long enough. I turned to leave. Passed by his table. Didn't stop. But as I reached the door I said just loud enough for him to hear, "Next time you lie, make sure she doesn't own a recording device." I walked out into the sunlight. The courthouse steps felt like the beginning of a new season. Crisp, unapologetically clear. No revenge, no bitterness. Just the sound of shoes on pavement and a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for defending her own dignity. It started with one letter. A pale blue envelope handwritten in looping cursive with no return address. It arrived 2 days after the verdict. I found it tucked between a box of chai syrup and a shipment of compostable straws. Ruth must have brought it in when I wasn't looking. She had a habit of letting herself in early, claiming she needed to check the feng shui of my coffee stirrers. I opened the letter slowly, expecting a bill or a quaint welcome to town card from some obscure Rotary Club chapter. But it wasn't that. Inside was a single page. "Dear Brielle, I don't know you, but I watched you. I watched that video, the one they said was cruel, the one they said was calculated, and I didn't see cruelty. I saw courage. I saw the woman I needed to see 10 years ago when I stayed quiet through a betrayal that broke every part of me. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for showing the rest of us we can survive too. No signature. Just a lipstick mark pressed faintly into the bottom right corner. I reread it 3 times, each time slower. Then I placed it inside the drawer behind the counter next to my mother's letter, like they belonged together somehow, bookends from 2 women I would never meet, reminding me that silence wasn't the legacy I had to inherit. The next day, another letter arrived, then an email, then 20. The café became something else overnight, not just a place for lattes and lemon scones, but a haven for confessions. Women showed up with stories stitched into their skin. Some talked, some just sat. Some wrote little notes on napkins and left them under their coffee cups like breadcrumbs for the next woman who might sit there. One of them, a banker in her 40s with silver streaks in her braid, left behind a note that read, "I wish I'd had the guts to do what you did. But maybe my daughter will." I pinned that one to the bulletin board near the register. We started calling it the Wall of Second Vows. By the end of the week it was full. But it wasn't until that Tuesday afternoon that I felt the shift deep in my bones. The bell over the door rang the same as always. I was steaming milk behind the counter, humming an old Norah Jones song under my breath. She looked no older than 22. Hair in a low ponytail, dressed in a cream sweater, too big for her frame, mascara smudged like she'd wiped her eyes without thinking. She hesitated just inside the threshold, hands wrapped tightly around the strap of her canvas bag. Her eyes found mine. "You're her," she said. Not a question, a knowing. I nodded. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be saying this in public. I watched the video. I saw the whole thing. I waited. She took a breath. I was supposed to get married yesterday. Something tightened in my chest. She kept talking, the words tumbling out in fragile pieces. He'd been acting strange for weeks. Kept blaming stress. Said I was just overthinking. But then my friend sent me the clip. Of you. Of what you did. I don't even know how she found it, but she did. Her lips trembled. I watched you stand in your wedding dress, play that video, and walk away like you weren't burning. And I thought if she can survive the fire, so can I. Silence stretched between us. I called off the wedding. I left the hotel at 5 a.m. He still doesn't know where I am. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached behind me and pulled a chair from the wall. Carried it over to the table in the corner, the one that always sat empty even during rush hour. I placed it gently across from the one that was already there. She watched me. Then I nodded. "Sit," I said softly. "You're safe here." She did. Didn't cry. Didn't collapse. Just sat there, her whole body exhaling like it hadn't been allowed to breathe for days. I brought her a cup of coffee. No charge. Just cream and sugar and space. And when I set the cup down in front of her, I didn't say anything profound. I didn't tell her she was brave or wise or fierce. I just said, "You're not the only one." She looked up, and in her eyes I saw the flicker of something I recognized. A second vow still forming, still fragile, but real. Later that night, after the café closed, I stayed behind. I lit a candle on every table. The letters from women across the country were spread out in front of me, folded, crumpled, smeared with ink. Every single one a thread in a quilt I hadn't known I was stitching. I read them out loud, not for anyone to hear, just for the walls, so the silence would remember, so the ghosts of the women who'd never spoken could know they'd been heard at last. By morning, I'd pinned 10 more to the board. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped whispering and started answering back. Under the hush of twilight, the café had emptied out. The chairs were flipped, the lights dimmed. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the vintage wall clock filled the silence. I was seated at the corner table, tracing the rim of my teacup with a fingertip, letting the stillness soak in. It had been a good day. Not because anything grand had happened, but because nothing had. That kind of peace used to feel foreign. Now it felt earned. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost tossed it aside, assuming it was spam or a telemarketer. But something intuition or closure, maybe both, told me to pick up. "Hello." A breath, and then his voice. "Damien." I hadn't heard it since the courtroom. He didn't say my name, didn't apologize, didn't even clear his throat first. He just asked, "Did you ever really love me?" Not "how are you?" Not "I'm sorry." Just that. A question soaked in whatever version of grief he was now carrying. Whatever echo of guilt he hadn't drowned with his ego. I stared at the floor for a long second. Part of me wanted to hang up, not in anger, but because I owed myself nothing less than silence from him. Still I spoke. My voice wasn't angry or soft, it just was. "I loved you so much," I said, "that I forgot how to love myself." He didn't reply right away, so I continued slowly, deliberately, like peeling off the last piece of dead skin. "I made you my home, my beginning and end. I excused things I shouldn't have, laughed off red flags like they were party decorations. I told myself love meant choosing someone even when they didn't choose you back with the same honesty." He inhaled sharply. Not a gasp, just a ripple in whatever armor he still wore. "I loved you," I said again. "I loved you so deeply it silenced me. But that wasn't your fault. That was mine. Because real love shouldn't cost you your voice." He still didn't speak, and for once I didn't rush to fill the void. When he finally did talk, his voice was smaller. "I think about you every day." I let the words float for a moment. Then I replied, "I think about me now too." Another pause. Then he asked quietly, "Would you do it the same way? If you could go back?" I didn't even blink. I would have left sooner. That was the truth. Not because I didn't care, but because I now knew the cost of staying. "Is there someone else?" he asked, trying to pretend it didn't matter. I smiled, not because I had someone new, but because I didn't need to anymore. "There's me," he sighed. A long, weary thing, like he'd been holding his breath since the wedding. "Can we ever talk again?" he asked. and I knew right then what he meant. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted access. He wanted the door left open, even if just a crack. But I had learned something important about doors once you close them for the right reasons. Don't reopen them for the wrong ones. So I said, "This is the last time, Damien." Silence. Then okay. I didn't say goodbye. I simply hung up. And with it, I hung up the last thread tethering me to the girl I used to be when I loved him. I exhaled, not because I was sad, but because even closure deserves breath. I walked to the window, looked out over the lake. The moonlight shimmered across the water like a second sky. And for the first time, I didn't replay the conversation in my head. Didn't overanalyze my tone or wish I'd said more or less. I just let it be. A call, a line drawn, a final gentle no. And then I picked up the closed sign, turned it to face the window, locked the door behind me, and went upstairs to the quiet, to the clean sheets, to the woman I'd fought to become. No ghosts, no guilt. Just me. Finally, just me. It began with a pen. Just one. Blue ink, simple, unremarkable. I placed it in the center of a jar on the front counter next to a stack of off-white stationery cards I'd ordered from a local print shop. They weren't branded or glossy, no logo or slogan, just space, blank space. Above it I taped a sign, small, handwritten, unassuming, letter to myself. Write who you were, who you are, or who you're becoming. Seal it, date it. We'll keep it safe until you're ready. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few curious glances, a couple of half-hearted scribbles from college students waiting for their Americanos. But by the end of the first day, there were 6 envelopes in the jar. By the end of the week, 47. They came from women of all kinds. One signed only with the letter R and filled her letter with 3 words written over and over, "I forgive you." Another had delicate, trembling handwriting and wrote, "Next time I will listen to my gut. And I will leave before I'm forced to." Some were longer. Confessions. Vows. Apologies to their younger selves. Promises to stop apologizing for being too much, too loud, too angry, too honest. None of them were read aloud. That was the rule. You write it. You seal it. You leave it behind like an anchor or a seed, depending on what kind of day it is. The jar got fuller, so I brought out a second one, then a wooden box. Eventually I cleared a shelf and called it the Wall of Becoming. It wasn't meant to be a movement. I didn't have hashtags or merchandise or a campaign strategy. It was just something I needed. Something I didn't know other people needed too. Every Saturday we hosted a quiet hour. No phones, no laptops. Just soft music, warm light, and pens moving across paper. No one talked much during those hours. The café held a different energy, then still, but alive. Women would glance up and lock eyes briefly, nod, return to their thoughts. We weren't strangers. Not really. We were witnesses. And something about being seen quietly, without needing to explain yourself, heals faster than being heard. One morning, a woman named Helena came in. She was older, maybe late 60s, wore a silk scarf around her neck like armor. She sat near the fireplace with a cup of mint tea and didn't speak for an hour. Then she approached me. "Can we mail them?" she asked, tapping a finger on the sealed envelope in her hand. I tilted my head. "To who?" She smiled gently. "To the woman I might become. Wherever she ends up." I bought a post office box the next day. We made a drawer just for time-traveling letters. Each one marked with a return date, a future address, or instructions like only open if I forget who I am again. It was sacred. People began traveling hours just to write theirs. Sometimes they brought friends. Sometimes they came alone and left lighter. One girl, 16, maybe wrote a letter and asked if she could read me the last line before sealing it. I nodded. She cleared her throat and said, "Dear future me, if you're reading this, that means you made it. And even if you're not okay yet, I'm still so proud of you for surviving." We both cried, not loudly, just enough. Enough to know healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet of pen against paper, of hands holding mugs, of chairs pulled close. I started writing letters too, some to my mother, some to the girl I used to be sitting in a wedding dress pretending not to bleed, and some to the version of me I hadn't met yet, the one with deeper laugh lines, softer mornings, and more plants than regrets. One night I stayed late. The café was closed, rain tapping gently on the windows. I lit a single candle and opened one of my own sealed envelopes. It had been dated 6 months ago. Inside I had written, "You're not responsible for the damage others did while you were asleep at the wheel of love. You just have to drive better now. That's all." I smiled, folded it again, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it back on the shelf, not because I wasn't ready, but because I wanted to remember that we're not built from the betrayals we survived. We're built from the pages we dared to write after. Under the soft gold of a late autumn afternoon, the café smelled like cinnamon and warm wood. I had just finished sweeping leaves from the porch when I saw her, Mrs. Aldridge. She walked slower these days, but still with a spine straight enough to make you sit up just by watching her. Hair pulled back into a simple twist, always in earth tones, always smelling faintly of lavender and old paperbacks. She came in twice a week, sometimes 3. Never ordered anything but black tea and a plain biscuit. Never stayed long. But that day she lingered. "Do you mind if I sit?" she asked, nodding to the armchair near the fireplace. "Of course not." I smiled. I was just about to make tea. I brought over her usual, sat across from her. No apron. Just 2 women, 2 cups, and the low crackle of the fire. She held her cup with both hands. Didn't speak for a moment. Then, eyes still fixed on the steam, she said, "I saw the article in the paper about your letter to myself project." I nodded. It sort of took on a life of its own. "It's brave," she said, "and long overdue." I waited, sensing more. She didn't disappoint. "I left my husband in 1957, she said quietly. Packed a suitcase, snuck out before sunrise, caught a train from Raleigh to Portland. Had $37 to my name and a radio I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. My breath caught, but I didn't interrupt. "He wasn't a monster," she continued. "Not in the way people expect. Never raised a hand, never yelled. But he had a way of folding me up so small I forgot I had a shape of my own. I wasn't a wife. I was a mirror he wanted to see himself in." The fire popped gently between us. "My parents disowned me," she said. "Said I'd embarrassed them. That no woman in our family had ever left her husband." She sipped her tea. "I suppose I was the first disgrace. And yet here you are," I said softly. She looked at me then. Eyes like cracked porcelain. Beautiful and breakable, but never broken. "I survived," she said. "But I lived quietly. Worked in a library. Took care of stray cats. Never remarried. Never told anyone what I'd done or why. Until now." I let her words settle. Then slowly I reached for my own mug and said I used to think silence was weakness, that not screaming made you complicit. She nodded like she remembered thinking that once too. But now I said I think silence is where we catch our breath, where we choose our moment, because shouting without timing is just noise. Her lips twitched almost a smile. "Exactly," she said. I leaned in. "Lately I've been wondering if strength isn't about the moment we walk away, but how we carry ourselves after. What we do with the silence that follows." "Silence," she echoed. "Yes, silence is a blank page. Some women use it to disappear, but some use it to rewrite." We sat like that for a while, just breathing, just knowing. 2 women separated by decades, bound by a decision most people never understood, not until they'd lived it. And even then, not all of them did. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Her hands stilled around the teacup. "I regret how long it took me," she said. "But not the leaving. Never the leaving." I smiled. "You were brave." She shook her head gently. "No, I was late. You're the brave one." I looked at the board behind us, covered in letters, and folded pieces of futures yet to be opened. "You know I said you could write one too." She raised an eyebrow. "A letter to the woman who walked onto that train in 1957. I continued. "Let her know she was never alone." She was quiet. Then slowly she nodded. "Maybe I will." I offered her my hand. Together we walked to the counter. She picked up a card, took a pen, and wrote, no hesitation, no trembling, just steady strokes as if the words had been waiting 60 years to be freed. When she finished, she sealed the envelope and handed it to me. For the wall, she asked. I placed it gently in the center. Always, I said. That evening, as I closed the shop, I thought about how healing didn't always come from young voices shouting into the wind. Sometimes it came from older ones whispering, I survived too. And that whisper carried more weight than 1,000 screams. A letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in a heavy envelope, cream-colored thick paper, the kind you don't see anymore. My name was written in careful slanted cursive, the ink just slightly smudged as if the writer had paused too long between words. There was no return address, no stamp from a company or court, just a name pressed into the corner in dark blue embossed Charles René, Damien's father. I sat with the letter for a full hour before opening it. Not out of fear, just reverence. The way you approach something that doesn't belong to the present moment. A relic from another life. A voice you never expected to hear again. When I finally slid the letter open, the paper made a soft sigh. It began simply. Dear Brielle, I don't expect this letter to fix anything. I don't expect a reply. But I owe you words that no one else had the courage or humility to give. Already I could feel the weight of him. I had met Charles only a handful of times. He was a man of presence, sharp suits, firmer handshakes, and a voice that knew how to fill a room. But beneath the charm had always been something quieter, something brittle. The kind of man who believed in legacy, not intimacy. Who could measure success in stock options, but struggled to measure love in anything but expectations. I raised a son to win, he wrote, to perform, to be admired. I taught him to chase ambition, to take what he wanted, to never apologize for reaching too far. I taught him to prioritize strategy over sincerity, confidence over conscience. I thought I was preparing him for the world, but I was only teaching him how to break it. You were not collateral, but you became a casualty, and for that I'm sorry. I read those words 3 times, not because they changed anything, but because they were true. There was no plea in the letter, no defense of Damien's choices, no attempt to soften the blow or blame the moment. Just a man older now, probably sitting at a desk with a brandy he couldn't taste, staring into the ghost of the son he'd helped build. I saw the video he wrote. Everyone did. But what struck me most wasn't the betrayal. It was your calm. The way you stood there in white in silence and refused to let anger distort your truth. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You just let the evidence speak. And then you walked away with something my son never learned to carry: dignity. That part stung, because once I had imagined Charles as a father-in-law. I had tried to impress him. Laughed at his stories, nodded through his business advice over brunch, played the part of the woman who could fit beside his golden boy. And now he was telling me I had more grace than his son. What a strange symmetry. The letter ended like this. I don't ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry I helped raise a man who thought love was something to be managed instead of honored. Wherever you are now, I hope it's quiet. With respect, Charles René. I folded the letter slowly, smoothly, as if rushing it might break something fragile. Then I stood across the room, opened the drawer beneath the register, and slid the envelope in. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't do anything dramatic. Because some truths don't need grand reactions. They just need to be heard and left behind. I closed the drawer, not out of closure, but containment. I had no rage left for Damien, no pity for his father, no desire to untangle the knots they had tied around themselves. They had their lives, and I had mine. The café was quiet. A breeze stirred through the window. Outside, a couple of high school girls sat on the porch steps, sipping iced tea and laughing softly. It smelled like lavender again. Ruth must have changed the diffuser. I exhaled, not sharply, just released. That was the thing no one ever told me about healing. It doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like folding a letter gently and placing it in a drawer you'll never open again. Not out of bitterness, but because you've run out of reasons to keep checking if it still hurts. Under the soft hush of dusk, the lake outside my window glimmered like brushed silver. The café was closed early that evening. No customers, no soft jazz humming through the speakers, no scent of espresso or cinnamon in the air. Just me. I stood in the kitchen with bare feet and a linen apron, carefully slicing heirloom tomatoes, brushing sourdough with rosemary olive oil, drizzling vinaigrette over fresh greens. Each motion was deliberate, unhurried. There was no rush. Tonight was for one. For me, the table was already set. Just a small round table by the fireplace. One chair, a folded cloth napkin, a single wine glass catching the last amber streak of daylight, a candle flickering next to a vintage porcelain plate I'd only ever admired from the shelf. I lit it without ceremony, and then I placed the name card, white heavy cardstock. I wrote it by hand in ink that didn't smudge this time. Guest of honor, the survivor. I stared at it for a while, not out of pride, not out of pity, but recognition. There had been so many nights before this. Nights I'd cooked meals with shaking hands. Nights I'd curled in bed replaying betrayals like lullabies made of glass. Nights I had opened the same drawer and read the same letters, wondering if silence was strength or just a disguise for loneliness. But tonight was different. I poured the wine, just half a glass, sat down, took a breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like arrival. Some people think survival is the same as endurance, that it means limping past the finish line with blood on your knees and a scream on your lips. But I've learned that real survival is quieter than that. It's setting the table for yourself without shame. It's placing your name at a seat you once thought belonged to someone else. It's eating alone and not calling it loneliness but peace. I took a bite of salad. It was crisp and bright with just the right hint of lemon. Then I spoke. Not aloud, just in my head, but the words rang clear. Some people win by being the loudest. I won by not asking for permission to speak. I didn't chase victory. I chased the truth. And for the first time, I heard my real voice. I didn't toast. There was no need. The candlelight danced in my glass, the world beyond the windows soft and still. This was not the end of a love story. It wasn't even the beginning of a new one. It was something else, something quieter, more sacred. It was a woman eating dinner alone, unapologetically whole. I finished my meal, blew out the candle, stood and gathered the dishes, humming a tune I didn't recognize but knew I'd heard once long ago in a version of myself I had finally returned to. And as I washed each plate by hand, I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for once I was.